Hey guys, today I'm going to be going over my sculpting process inside Blender. We'll be looking over the sculpting workspace, how to use the different tools, and which ones are the most worthwhile to use, as well as how to use dynamic topology, make our own custom brushes to add textures, and various other techniques to help you turn something like this into something like this. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to want to do once we're in Blender is to get our starting shape that we're going to sculpt from. So I personally really like using a sphere when I sculpt. However, I'm going to use a sphere and a cube today just to better demonstrate the different qualities of each brush. So we're going to leave default cube alive for today, and we're going to add in a sphere. So hold down Shift, press A. This will bring up your little add menu, go down to Mesh, and find UV sphere. Then we'll just want to press G to move it around. Press Y to move it along the Y axis, and we'll just move it off to the side right there. Now we have our two starting shapes, but they're not actually ready to sculpt yet. See, if we select our cube, press Tab to go into edit mode, we can see that it has really low topology. It's not very subdivided, which means if we exit edit mode there and go into the sculpting tab just real quick, scale our brush, we're not actually drawing on top of the cube like you might want. This is because we don't have enough topology to work with. So we're going to go back to layout and we're going to subdivide these shapes. Now that's very, very easy. All we have to do is click on our cube, come over to modifiers, which is this little blue wrench icon on the right hand side. Now you can hit add modifier and search up subdivision surface, or we can just select our cube, hold control and press 3. And that'll subdivide it for us automatically, and you can see that the modifier just popped up over here on the right hand side. Now our cube has kind of turned into a sphere, which is a little bit redundant because we already have a sphere over here. So if we want to keep it as a cube, all we have to do under the subdivision modifier is click simple. Now it's back to being a cube, and I'm just going to hit apply, and let's go back into edit mode and see what changes that made. Boom, we have instantly more topology. It's not as much as I would like though, so I'm going to do Control plus 3 again with that selected. That gives us another layer of subdivisions. And we'll just come back over here. We want to hit Simple to sharpen up those edges, bring it back to a cube, and then hit Apply. There we go. That's much, much denser topology. And if we just go back into the sculpt mode real quick, you can see now that our shape is actually working the way that we would expect it to in the sculpt mode. So that's a very, very important step. And we are ready to hop into the sculpting panel. So let's just go up to the top right here, find where it says sculpting, and enter our sculpting panel. Now I'm going to preface this by saying that I'm in Blender version 4.3. And in 4.3, we actually have an entire rework of the sculpting layout here. So all of our brushes are now down at the bottom, all displayed here in just this little library, and they each have their own like little 3D icon now, which I think is actually really cool. They used to just all be on the side here and you'd have to scroll through them, although it can be a little overwhelming seeing all of these here. But don't worry, if you're feeling overwhelmed, I can save you a little stress by telling you about 75% of these you're never going to use. A lot of them just have really hyper specific uses for a lot of situations that, you know, as a beginning sculptor, you're probably really not going to need. What we're going to focus on here today are the ones that I think are the most useful and the ones that I personally really enjoy using in my own sculpting process. So the first brush we're going to be taking a look at, of course, it's a classic. It's the draw brush. This is the one that you're going to be on by default when opening the sculpting panel. And this is just your basic run-of-the-mill, unseasoned brush. When we go to sculpt on our surface, it does exactly what you would expect. And it just kind of draws right on the surface of our shape. And it's just really the most basic tool. You can just draw on details just like that across your surface. Now, a lot of these other brushes do the same thing, but in a much more unique sort of specified way. My favorite brush is called the clay strips brush. Now, again, it's like drawing on the surface, except you can see that it's more of this square shape, and it has a really, really harsh edge to it. Now, it comes in two versions. There's clay and clay strips. Now, clay does the same thing. However, it's a lot more smooth. It's not as harsh or sharp. Personally, I really, really like clay strips just for like blocking out certain parts of my sculpts. It's really good for like musculature or just different parts of anatomy, just blocking out basic shapes to then smooth over later, because it has this really nice layering effect that I really enjoy. Clay is also pretty nice. I just don't really use that one as much because I prefer to do the smoothing on my own, and it's sort of just better to block things out with this harsher, blockier shape, in my personal opinion. You may like the aesthetic of the normal clay brush more, and if you do, go ahead and use that one. But I really love Clay Strips brush. It's one of my favorites. I realized I have run out of undos and I cannot fix my cube. Actually, this provides a perfect learning opportunity for how to swap between our two objects. See, the cube is currently our selected object in sculpt mode, but if I go to sculpt on my sphere, well, nothing really happens. Now, if we want to swap from the cube to the sphere, all we have to do is hover over it like this, hold down Alt, and press Q. And then it'll do that little orange highlight, and that shows you which item you have selected. Now, if we go back over here, hold Alt Q, now we're back on the cube. If we do Alt Q, now we're on the sphere. And that's just very useful if you have a lot of separate parts in your mesh or your character or whatever. You want to quickly swap between them. Instead of going back to layout and selecting another model and then going back to sculpt, you can just hold down Alt Q, and that will bounce between your objects perfectly. Now, besides clay strips, my other favorite brush is actually called the crease brush, and this also comes in two different variants. We have the crease polish and we have the crease sharp, which is very similar to the clay, whereas one of them is a bit more gradual, a bit more smooth, which is just the basic crease brush. You can see it's sort of like this little crevice or wrinkle in the surface of our sphere, and that's crease polish. Crease sharp does exactly what you'd think. It does the same thing, but sharper. It has a much less gradual effect on the sphere. It just has an overall more sharp feel to it. And I just really like the effect this does. It's really good for wrinkles in the skin. And I just go crazy with this thing in the detailing stage of my sculpts. It's so much fun. And it really can add so much just by doing a little line here and there throughout your monster or whatever you're creating. It's just a really great brush, and it's in definitely my top 3. Now, next in line we have Inflate, which will probably show up a lot better on the cube. If we go back to the cube, it sort of just makes this inflated bulb sort of shape on your surface, which can be really useful, especially if you have like limbs on a creature or character and they're a little too skinny. You can just take this brush to it and inflate it up, and it fixes it right away. It just adds some more mass. And yeah, that one's really useful. Then we kind of have a few nobodies in the middle here. Layer is just a lamer clay strips, in my opinion. It's a bit more artificial. We have Flatten, which if we come back to our cube here, just sort of flattens the surface you're looking at from the viewpoint that you're seeing it from. So now the side of our sphere is flattened. Plateau is a similar sort of effect, whereas it drags it more outwards when it's flattening. After Plateau, we have a couple other guys who we don't really need to learn about. Smooth is very important. If we come back to the cube here, we can smooth things out like that. Very useful brush as well if we have sharp edges we need to get rid of. Now we're going to move on to, they aren't exactly brushes, I would call them more tools, which is the grab and the snake hook. So over here is where we have our grab brush. We're going to select a little area and just pull outwards. Basically what the grab brush does is it just takes a selected area and it grabs it, and you can just pull stuff around. It's really good for just adjusting the size and position of certain areas. It lets you just move things around a little bit. I'd say its cousin brush is the snake hook. Basically what it does is allow you to grab, but for longer, and you can kind of just stretch things out like so, and you can kind of change the direction in which you're grabbing. Now there's these elastic versions of these brushes, and sort of what that does is it just kind of pulls along the rest of the mesh. You can see how the sphere gets kind of pulled down with this area that we're grabbing, whereas if we go back to the normal snake hook and we grab and we pull down, the rest of the sphere stays in place. And that can just be kind of an interesting effect, but usually it's somewhat of a nuisance, so I like using just the normal versions. And now we pretty much have 2 whole rows of brushes left to go. A lot of these, again, are not very useful. These are the paint brushes, so if you're vertex painting, so automatically those are ruled out. We don't need them in sculpting. These purple ones here are all your cloth sim brushes, which are actually really fun to use on a surface. We might play around with those once we start messing around with dynamic topology, but for now we're going to ignore them. Really the only one down here that I want to look at is the mask brush. And what the mask brush does is it'll draw on this black sort of paint onto the surface of your sculpt. And what it does is wherever you paint black, you cannot affect. So let's go back to our draw brush real quick. So we have our draw brush and we go over and boom, it stops right on the edge of the black. So now that we've gone over all of our brushes, let's go over the rest of the tools we have at our disposal. A lot of those are actually going to be shortcuts. Shortcuts are very important within any aspect of Blender, just to save you a bunch of time. So I think our really fugly cube over here is going to be a perfect example for a lot of these shortcuts. We've already gone over Alt-Q, swapping between objects. The next one is going to be changing the size of your brush. Now you have brush properties up here at the top, so it'll tell you what brush you are using. The radius or size of your brush will be right here. And then you have the strength of your brush. And this plus and minus icon here is dictating whether you are adding on to a surface or subtracting or taking away. But first, let's look at what if we're sculpting away at our object here and I want to change the size of my brush, but I don't want to have to go all the way up to the top. All you have to do is press F and you'll see this big circle that pops up and you can drag in and out and that rescales your brush size. So now it's like humongous and you can draw really big, or you can hold down F, shrink it down and go real small. If you want to control strength, you hold down Shift and F, and that will control the strength of your brush. So if we make that really low, you can see now we're drawing much more faintly, and it takes a lot of overlapping to actually see the bumps that we're making on the surface of the cube. And finally, if we want to invert the brush with this little plus minus icon here, all we have to do is hold down Control. So right now, the draw brush is adding onto our surface, but if we want to take away, all we have to do is hold down Control, and now we're subtracting and carving into the surface. And that's very useful, mostly because you get kind of lost in drawing on top of things. And when we're working in 3D, subtracting and taking away is just as important a part of the process as adding on. Now actually what I just did here, what I'm doing right now, is smoothing. And that's the next shortcut we're going to go over. If you hold down Shift on your keyboard, that'll automatically take you to the smooth tool. You probably won't use the smooth brush itself that often because you'll just hold down Shift with whatever brush you were currently using and you can smooth out your surface just like that. Now the final shortcut I'm going to teach you guys is just really simple one. Press M and it'll change your brush to the mask brush. So now you can just automatically mask around and draw your mask in and swap between your brushes like so. Yeah, that's about it. Shift, F, and Control. Those are going to be your main shortcuts, and of course, if you ever forget those, you can also always just go right up here at the top and switch them manually. Now we're going to be going over just a few other settings that you can mess around with your sculpting. First off, we're going to start off with Symmetry. So let's say I want to drag out this part of my sphere, but I want it happening on both sides. What we're going to do is go up to the top here and hit the X button. Now you can hit Y and Z and that'll apply symmetry across all the other axes, but usually you just want to do X symmetry. And now that will, so I guess in our case we're actually going to do Y because we're facing the other way. And now you can see that our object is being symmetrically altered on either side. And that's a very important tool if you're doing, pretty much anything, any symmetrical object, like you're doing a head or a face. That's a setting you're going to want to turn on immediately because symmetry is just very important for those types of things. Now you'll see sculpting just becomes a lot easier when you have symmetry on, and it can save you so much time. Now you'll see that my new sphere and cube actually have a lot more limited topology than I used to have. And if we take our draw brush, you'll see we have such a low resolution. We're not getting any detail here at all. If this is the case, we'll come back to the sculpting panel and we want to go up to the top right and check this little box next to what says Dyne Topo. What that stands for is dynamic topology. And what dynamic topology means is that it will add on topology, like extra vertices, as you're drawing. So right now, we're just working with what geometry is already here in front of us. And you can see the more we draw out, the more stretched out these faces get because we're working with a limited number of vertices. But what dynamic topology is going to do, if we check that, is it's going to create new topology as we sculpt. Now let's open up our dynamic topology settings for a second because there's a few different options we might want to play with. So detail size is kind of just the resolution that we'll be working at. Right now I'm going to leave that at 12. What we really want to look at is down here where it says detailing, and it says relative detail right now. So let's select our draw brush. And if we zoom out, scale it down a bit and work from out here, you'll see that it's drawing, and it's at a pretty low resolution still. It's not adding that much. We can see all the planes in there, but if we zoom in and we draw onto this surface, now we're drawing at a completely different resolution. Basically, what this relative detail setting means is that the resolution that we are sculpting at is relative to our distance from the object. So we can get like really, really small in here. If we go out to layout real quick, you can see the topology stays pretty low in other areas, only gets dense where we have our details. Now, instead of relative detail, we're going to click on constant detail. And these are the two like main options you're going to be using. Constant detail is probably what you would infer. So it sculpts at a constant detail no matter what your viewport size of the object is. No matter how close to it you are, you will always be sculpting at the same size. Relative detail is great, don't get me wrong, but you'll see if we go back to relative detail, if we zoom out where we have all these little details and we click there, boom, they're erased. And that can be really, really frustrating. If you work at constant detail, and we'll just ramp that up, you never have to worry about like zooming out and going in and like changing the topology of one area because it's always going to be set at the same rate. Typically, I will usually work in constant. You won't really move to relative detail until you get to like the hyper detailing of your sculpt near the end of the process. Now, moving over to our sphere over here, we're going to go over the final cool little trick, which is texture brushes. So let's turn on dynamic topology really quick, and we'll go to constant detail. I'm just going to crank it up to 30. What if we want to make a really cool, like, I don't know, just like lined texture across our thing here? We want like, you just scribble on there. And as you can imagine, getting like an exact type of detail that you want or something, let's say you want like a bumpy skin texture with pores in it, or you want bricks or something like that, sculpting that out is going to be very, very difficult to do by hand, and you're probably not going to want to do that. Something that is very commonly used in my own pipeline and many other people's are texture brushes. And you can download them from separate websites, or you can just make them yourself. And making them yourself is super, super easy. And I just want to show you guys how to do that real quick before we get to the rest of today's video. So let's just bring over a new tab in whatever web browser you use. It doesn't really matter. I'm gonna look up a fungus texture. It doesn't really matter what image you use. Oh, this one's perfect. This looks great. So let's just save that image. It doesn't really matter where. I have a little folder here for my textures. Now I'm gonna edit my texture really quick because it is important to know that Blender reads height maps. Well, any program will read a height map as white goes up, black goes down. So when we go to sculpt, the black areas are going to sink down into our surface and the white area is going to come up. And let's just say I want to change that. I'm just going to go to invert that, and boom, now we have this sort of thing. And I'm going to delete the saturation. You can do this in any photo editing platform, or you can just look up height maps on Google Images. But I'm just altering mine for the sake of today on my own. And bam, now we have that, and let's save it. And come back to Blender once you've found your image. Honestly, you don't really have to edit it if you don't want to, but you know, if you know how to use a basic photo editor, Photoshop, you can really just tweak your texture to your heart's content. But once we're back in Blender, just come over to the little checker grid down on the right, and that'll be your texture panel. And this is where we make new textures just for anything to use in Blender. We'll want to hit new, And then right where there's this little image option, it has new and open. We're going to want to hit open, and then just go on your computer to wherever you had that texture, and we're going to want to just drop it in. So fungus mold right there, open image. Now you'll see that our texture is in Blender. All you have to do after that is go back to your brush tool, which is going to be all the way at the top. It's this little like wrench and screwdriver. Now we're at our brush. Now, to make our draw brush a texture brush, what we have to do is go down in our settings, and you'll see where it says texture. Click that drop down, and actually mine's already selected. So if I go to draw with this brush, actually press F and try and rescale your brush, and you'll see that your texture is already there. And boom, I can draw on there, and we have like this cool bumpy texture. And you can see just how much time that would save me. And yeah, I love it. It's cool. And that's how you make your own texture brushes. That's a very quick rundown, but if you want more advanced tutorials, I'm sure other people have them. That's really all you need to know to get started making your own brushes. And just before we move on, I actually really wanted to go back and look at these simulation brushes real quick. A lot of them are cloth based, and they can actually just really have some cool effects. So if we take, let's just take this drag cloth brush. Make sure dynamic topology is on. I have mine at the constant detail setting, and I'm just going to bump it up to 40. Actually, I think I want to try this out on my sphere. We can pull around, and you see it's kind of like pushing it around as if the surface of our sphere is now like cloth or fabric. And this is a really, really cool effect for like, well, you know, I sculpt monsters, and it's really nice for skin. If you have areas that are pinched or folded, it's really good to get like that saggy flesh look that, you know, a lot of monsters and creatures can have, especially around like the neck, or just like, you know, areas where we get a lot of folds, joints and elbows and things like that. And it's really, really cool. Actually, you can get some really interesting patterns here with these cloth brushes. So it's just something you might want to check out. I didn't want to brush over them too quick because I have been using them a bit more recently. After playing around with them, I just wanted you to know kind of what they did and what you could do with them in your own sculpts. So yeah, that's cloth brushes. And now that we've gone over all of our tools and are ready to begin sculpting, I'll walk you through my own personal process in making this monster while applying everything we just previously learned. But before we can do that, I wanted to let you guys know that you can actually download this monster for free as a patron on my Patreon page. That's right, just for $3 a month, you can get access to all of the models and scenes from my videos, as well as some other really cool perks like behind the scenes content, early access to uploads, mentions at the end of my videos, and even gaming content where I play scary games. We also have several new shirt designs available on the Redbubble store. We of course have the classic red and black skull t-shirt, but we now also have this awesome mission poster t-shirt, as well as this sick demon head design. So if you'd like to get some cool perks or a dope new t-shirt, please check out my links down in the description. Your guys' support really, really helps me out and makes videos like this all the more possible. And with that, let's get back to the video. So to start myself off, I add my sphere and give it a quick subdivision surface modifier to up my starting topology. Immediately putting on my x-axis symmetry, I use my elastic snake tool and the grab tool to start pushing my topology around and form the basic shape of the head. Note that I haven't turned on dynamic topology just yet. I find it's best to leave that off while blocking out your forms so you don't focus on detail too soon, just the main shape of your subject. It's also very important to keep your viewport moving. Rotate your view frequently and just make sure that everything is looking good from all angles, because it's really easy to get caught up in one view and then forget to see what things look like from the top or the bottom or the other side. Once I have my very simple head shape blocked out, I turn on that dynamic topology setting up in the right corner so I can start adding on top of my sculpt and carve into it. Using a mix of the draw brush and inverting the crease tool by pressing Ctrl, I start adding these ridges along the top of the skull. I was taking a lot of inspiration from the Tyranids from Warhammer 40k, as well as the Xenomorph alien to get my head shape down. But I was actually drawing the most inspiration from just regular old crustaceans and crabs, aiming for like a hard looking shell exterior, which these ridges really help create. You also see me doing some subtraction here with my inverted draw brush, and this is very important throughout your whole process. A lot of the time, I feel like we get very focused on adding topology that we often forget that subtracting topology is just as important. Then I take the crease tool around the mouth and start adding some simple detail separating my fleshier areas from the shell of the head. I then hollow out my mouth a bit more, give him a simple tongue with the snake tool and crease brush, and move on to adding his neck and shoulders. Going back to the viewport, I add a new sphere, stretch it out, and sculpt a new basic form to resemble his neck. What we're doing here is a really useful trick within digital sculpting. Instead of adding the shoulders by stretching out our current head mesh, we actually build it onto a separate object first, and then we join the two together later. This helps to not risk damaging our current head's topology, or messing up the head or altering what it looks like, and it lets us focus on each part of the character separately. See, I can come back and reproportion my head to the neck before the two are actually joined. And I can do this without having to worry about messing up the shape of my neck while working on the head, or vice versa. Now, once you have two objects like this, and they're both fully sculpted and ready to join, what you want to do is use a Boolean modifier, which will turn them into one combined mesh. So let's go back to the viewport, select your head or whichever part you are joining the other object to, and then go to your modifiers tab on the right hand side of the screen. Then with your object still selected, search for Boolean. Looking at the panel for the Boolean modifier, we'll want to select the union option, and then when we click this little eyedropper, just go and select the other object that we want to combine it with. And once we join these two and apply our modifier, you'll actually notice that you have a duplicate of the old separate object, and you can either delete this or you can save it to keep a non-destructive workflow and just hide it by pressing H. And now your two pieces are combined. And then, if you'd like to smooth out the connections between your two recently joined objects, you can select the Remesh button in the top right of the Sculpting tab. But it's important to do this before adding your details. Otherwise, the remesh may erase some of the finer work you've done, so always try and do the whole Boolean remesh process during your blocking phase. Now, once I've joined and remeshed my monster, I go around and smooth all the connections, adding wrinkles and creases to kind of blend the neck to the head a bit better. Then I start using one of my favorite tools, the clay strips brush, which we talked about earlier, to start layering on mass along the neck and shoulders, as well as adding some cool spinal spikes along the monster's back using the grab tool. And that's really the bulk of our tool applications. From this point on, I simply go around using primarily my crease brush, clay strips, and the grab tool to refine the shape and layer on detail. A lot of sculpting, whether it's digital or traditional, is refining your shape. You move things around, then you rotate your sculpture, only to find that you need to adjust some other part. And this is probably going to be about 75% of your process. Doing the details is really fun, don't get me wrong, but it's probably the smaller portion of the sculpting process, which is why it's really important not to rush to the detailing stage too quickly. I like to get my basic shapes formed, maybe add some minimal detail, and then refine my shapes again. I sort of repeat this process and then just gradually add more and more detail over time. This is good so that I don't go in and just add a bunch of fine details, ramp up my topology, and then realize my mouth isn't the right shape, or that I actually want horns in this spot, or that I want a completely different head shape. These types of changes are really hard to make when your mesh's topology is more dense and detailed. So don't rush the process. Detailing is fun, but you'll thank yourself later for taking your time and crafting a good base first. And as you get further along, you can crank up your dynamic topology a bit more and add some finer and finer details the more comfortable you get with your sculpt's foundation. Now when it comes to details, I try focusing on my denser areas first, like the mouth, where I know I want a lot of little fleshy details. Especially since it's going to be surrounded by those larger areas of hard shell, the mouth being more densely detailed will add good contrast with those smoother, harder surfaces. The mouth is also my focal point, so having the most detail here is important. This is where I want people to look the most, it's the coolest part, so this is where all the detail is going to go. And as I add detail, I occasionally zoom back out and look at my whole model. Is the head too thin here? Is the jaw too high up? Little things like that are going to pop up mid-sculpting, so I always try and take little breaks in between just to look at the whole picture and make subtle changes over large areas, usually with the grab tool. See, this is something you can do with a detailed sculpt. Slightly nudging areas around works great. Changing the overall shape of your surface, not so much. But this shifting things around really makes a huge difference, and it's a good thing to check up on once in a while, even if you do have some details in already. Another useful way to do some adjustments is by using the masking tool. I realized I wanted my mouth to be a bit more open, so I selected the mask brush tool on the left hand side and black out everything except my lower jaw. And I can rotate my jaw on a set axis as if it were on a kind of armature. And honestly, from this point on, I just follow the processes I've already described to you. Adjust, add detail, adjust again, add more detail. And then I eventually get to the point where I'm ready to add some texturing, and I'll make my own custom brushes, just like we did earlier in the video. But I think we've pretty much gone over all that we need to, so I'm gonna shut up and let you watch the rest of my sculpting process in peace, and I'll check back in with you guys at the end. And after a couple hours of sculpting, here's my final result. I really hope you guys were able to learn some new things from this tutorial. I tried my best to go through all the tools and techniques that I personally use and find really helpful. But of course, sculpting is a big topic to cover in just one video, and I probably didn't get all of it. So please don't hesitate to reach out with any further questions you may have, whether it's down in the comments or on our Discord server, where we actually have a dedicated channel just for questions about Blender. And if you guys enjoyed this video and are interested in getting more tutorials, maybe in Topology or how to texture your sculpts, please let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.